UConn takes care of business last night against Creighton, securing a 72-53 win. We're going to talk about that, the Big East landscape, and we had a bracket reveal last night. Is UConn underseeded? You're locked on.
You are Locked On UConn, your daily podcast on the UConn Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks for making Locked On UConn your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Before we dive into today's show, we want to take a moment to say how thankful we are for all of you. We appreciate your support. We're proud to say we're the only daily podcast covering both the women and the men, the hoops capital of the world here and in stores. And we're thrilled to bring you the coverage you deserve. And to show that gratitude, we're giving back. We're donating 10% of our revenue to Husky Ticket Project, helping send kids to UConn games. A special shout out to all of my everydayers out there. All right. We have a packed show today. And we bring back T. Baker. We haven't seen him in a while, and that's okay. He's been doing other things. T is a contributor of Hoops Capital of the World and also at the Next, Big East beat reporter. All right, T. I know we're going to get into the Big East review, but I have to ask that first question. Did you think, and we're going to get to the bracket reveal, I'm kind of skipping ahead. What was your initial thought? Do you think UConn was underseeded as a 2 seed?
Hey, Mark. It is almost the most wonderful time of the year. Happy to be here.
It is.
Day away from March. I have been going back and forth on this in my head since the reveal, and sort of like where I sit right now is that they are underseeded, and that is because I believe in the power of the net rankings. I'm someone who that like data side of the thing, and UConn's number 1 right now. I think the key difference is they're 4-3 in quad 1 games, and South Carolina's 12-3, and that's just reflective of the competition. But UConn's number 1 in the net, and they kind of smacked South Carolina on their home court. So where's the respect?
Exactly. All right. Well, let's get into, and we're going to get into that. I'll tease that for the second segment because I have a fun graphic I want to show. But let's get back to business of last night. They take out Creighton. Creighton came in the 22nd ranked team in the country. Came out kind of hot. Creighton did. They started. I wouldn't say anyone was shooting the lights out because it was a really low scoring first quarter, 11-10 for UConn. But the Creighton came out to a 6-0 early lead, and I think it was 8-0 actually. And then from then on, it felt like UConn's defense was almost like a boa constrictor and really just suffocated Creighton the whole night.
Yeah, and the thing that I would note is that Creighton's also a very good team. I think like in the past couple of years, UConn's made them kind of seem like a tier B team, but they're nationally ranked. They made the Elite Eight a couple of years ago. They have the same core that they've had for the past several years. So whenever I see Creighton, being dominant on the offensive end, I'm not quite surprised. I think UConn helped in the beginning by not making a shot, and I think their first 8 shots. So
it's true.
Low start for UConn, but UConn continues to dominate in the conference, even those teams that, could and should be a little bit more competitive against the national landscape. But an overall good performance. I think you're right. The defensive end, they just shut them down. I think there was one point where UConn intercepted 3 inbound passes in a row. They just turned it on after that first media timeout, and then it was kind of downhill from there for Creighton.
Yeah, for me, I think Aubrey makes such a big difference when she comes in. She's easily the most athletic player on the court, for either team, whenever she steps on the floor. In particular in this game too. And you're right. At the beginning of the game, they started 1 for 9. So they missed their first 8 shots. It was a little bit of kind of a, a smoke and mirror start for Creighton because they start off with 2 threes to go up, I think 6, and then they got a layup. So it was 8-0. I was so impressed with the defensive intensity. And I feel like even though the start offensively was slow, it was a really encouraging to kind of see them kind of still kind of give all of the energy and the effort on the defensive side. You want to speak on that?
Well, it's March, and every year when the clock strikes March, UConn turns it on. I think especially on the defensive end. I remember, the first time I covered the Big East tournament 2 or 3 years ago, I just remember there being a different level of intensity. At the Big East Conference, you sit courtside and you can feel the intensity of the defense, the the switches are tighter, the communication's better. So this is just the time of the year that UConn really tries to peak. And I think their game always starts on the defensive end. Their defense creates offense in the pace that they want to see. So it's just that time of year, and really there's no nights off now.
For sure. Gino always says the regular season title still means something to new players, but doesn't have the same aura that may have, the old Big East when there were multiple top 10 teams in the tournament, when Notre Dame was there and others. Can you talk about that and kind of some of the things that he's speaking about? Because, myself, Bella, others who have jumped on this show, really, I mean, we really hit the Big East hard, but it's kind of for a good reason. But talk about why it still matters for UConn to win the Big East.
So, I think we can address the competitiveness piece, but I think it matters because it's the first time for all the players on the team as a team. I think that's what Gino always kind of says, like, this is Sarah's first time winning. She was surprised to get the t-shirt, like he's done it 60 times now with CD between regular season and tournament title, 60 times.
Yeah, that wasn't a typo. That wasn't, you didn't misspeak.
6-0. But it's the first time for the freshmen. It's the first time for Caitlin Chen, so I think you got to kind of remember that perspective. Like, these athletes are working all year for these goals, and that's their first one. Big East regular season, Big East tournament, NCAA tournament. So I think it still matters. And the Big East conference is a competitive conference within itself, outside of UConn. And I think that's the discouraging part for me about the conference. As someone who covers the conference,
sure,
I go to those games between, Villanova, Seton Hall, between Creighton and Providence. Like, those are good games, well-coached teams. UConn just has a different level of resources and a different level of talent. So that's what's tough about it. And there's some part of me that wishes UConn would be in a different conference so that the Big East itself could thrive in its own way. Because every year it's like kind of the UConn Invitational at the conference tournament, and Creighton has consistently been an excellent team that's worthy of winning a conference championship, but they just won't with UConn in the conference.
Yeah, I think we saw that last night. I think there's just a different level, and you're spot on about that. All right, we're going to take a quick break and then talk about the national landscape, and I'm going to share my graphic with the bracket reveal and all of that coming up after the break. Life moves fast, especially when you have a family. One day you're watching your kids take their first steps. Before you know it, they're off to college or wherever, and that's why securing their future is so important. Fabric by Gerber Life makes it simple to get term life insurance that fits your family's needs. With Fabric, you can apply for term life insurance online right from your couch. You could be covered in under 10 minutes, and in many cases, no health exam is required. As a parent, I want to make sure my family is financially protected no matter what happens, and Fabric gives me that peace of mind. Fabric also offers a free digital will and access to investment accounts to help you plan for your children's future. Join thousands of parents who trust Fabric to help protect their families. Apply today in just minutes at fabric.com/lockedoncollege. That's meetfabric.com/lockedoncollege. Policies issued by Western Southern Life Assurance Company, not available in certain states. Price subject to underwriting and health questions. All right, we're back on Locked On UConn with T. Baker, contributor to Hoops Capital of the World and the Next. All right, T. I'm just going to show this because I was watching the game last night and this popped up on my screen. This is the ESPN version, but I was kind of like, "Excuse me," and here it is. And there's me pointing at UConn. I'm sorry, what? Because and look. I'm being silly with this, but head-to-head matchups still matter. And regardless of what we talked about, T, about UConn being the one seed in the net, like being the analytics darling that they are. You're right. They're only 4-3 in quad one games. They lost to USC. They lost to Notre Dame. So I have no beef with who are the one seeds right now. But the fact that UConn is sixth in this bracket reveal, because that's what it is. They're in region 3. They're not, you know what I mean? So like, if you look at the list, because we have our trusty notes, USC is, or not USC. I hate when people do that. It's South Carolina. USC is Southern California. South Carolina is 5 and UConn is 6. This is where I think the committee is off. UConn beat South Carolina by 29 points, not 2 points, not 9 points, 29 points, and they're at 6. Couple that with a Notre Dame loss. They just lost 2 games in a row, and they're the 4th one seed. when they do another reveal, is South Carolina going to jump UConn there? Like, that's the thing that frustrates me, is like, I still think UConn's going to end up sneaking into a 1 seed at some point before the season ends. Tell me why I'm wrong, why I'm right.
Yeah, I agree with you on the 1 seed piece. I can't make an argument against any of those teams except for after last night, because Notre Dame lost again, that they should be a
Right.
1 seed. I think that does move Notre Dame off the 1 line, but then I am inclined to agree with you that means UConn's the other number 1 seed at the 4, and South Carolina is the first number 2 seed at the 5 overall. Like, that to me would make sense based on head-to-head matchups, based on what we know about the net ranking. So I definitely agree with you. I think that, like, what I look at more when I look at this bracket is who is UConn going to have to play to get to the Final Four.
Talk about it.
I actually prefer where they're at here than if they were in the same bracket as Notre Dame. I think USC is a team that they could match up with and defeat, over Notre Dame, to be honest with you. I think it was a closer matchup against USC. With Notre Dame, I think they're just a hot tournament team because they have such experience. Sanaya Citron, they have Olivia Miles, they have multiple WNBA players. I think USC is an excellent team, but I think Notre Dame has the experience where they're a more scary matchup to me in the NCAA tournament. And I just don't want to lose to Notre Dame. Honestly, I hate matching up with Notre Dame and up in the chance that they might be the reason the season ends. So that could be part of it. But I think for me, whether UConn's a 1 or 2 seed, I want to know who they're going to play to get to the Final Four. And where they sit right now, I don't feel terrible about it, but I do think that they will move to the 1 line following the Notre Dame loss. And either South Carolina or Texas is going to lose in the SEC tournament to the other. So those teams
Right.
are also going to pick up another loss, as well as USC and UCLA will pick up another loss either at the end of this regular season on Saturday when they match up again, or in the Big Ten tournament. So there's teams ahead of UConn that will be guaranteed to pick up another loss before the end of the season.
Something that is not talked about enough. We're going to keep this graphic up because I like my silly face in here. And if you're listening to this on audio, I'm literally just kind of like pointing at the UConn seating and just kind of being like, are you serious? Just to kind of give you some color around that. But the thing that's interesting to me is you just mentioned it. USC and UCLA are going to probably play at least once, maybe 2 more times, maybe 2 times when they played in the Big Ten tournament. Texas, South Carolina, same thing. There's a ton of SEC teams in this field of 16 that we have right here. ACC, same thing. North Carolina, Duke, NC State. UConn sitting there, no disrespect to Creighton because they're a good team, sitting pretty with the Big East and on a roll, likely going to sweep through the Big East tournament and be rested and, knock on wood, healthy while these teams beat each other up. Tell me why that's so important for this tournament run, because I feel like you could get a ragged USC, a ragged South Carolina, Notre Dame, Texas, UCLA, LSU coming into eventually like an Elite 8 matchup to get to the Final Four.
We've talked about on the show before, there's kind of the downside of UConn being in the Big East, which is a less competitive conference in that they don't get tested every night. But the benefit is they're not getting beat up every night. They're not getting beat up in the ACC or the SEC. Last night, I just watched a really tired Notre Dame team against Florida State, which is a very talented team. Tanaya Lotson, one of the best players in the country. But I think that there's something to be said about entering the tournament rested. UConn also has the advantage, like they're going to be in the state of Connecticut up until the regionals at this point. So there's not the travel wear and tear. So I think it does make a difference. And it kind of puts them in a position to enter, like you said, the tournament a little bit more rested. Now, on the other hand, these other teams are going to be getting experience in postseason play in their conference tournaments with down to the wire games, and that might get them sort of more in the mindset of finishing those games. So it depends on how you look at it. But I think in terms of body wear and tear and potential injuries, knock on wood, I think UConn has sort of a better setup in their current situation prior to the postseason beginning.
All right. Yeah, I agree. It's just one of those things where it's like kind of like a plus minus game, right? Like, I think for UConn, I think the advantages outweigh the cons, because even for myself, who I think at some point, I do think UConn likely moves on from the Big East because of rev share, because of, what the men and women are going to do with that money. There's a, football still matters at UConn to a lot of different people. So if we're just talking from a basketball perspective, I think they probably leave the Big East in a couple of years, but I think at this point in the last run of kind of Geno, so to speak, I think it's going to help them this year because it's so difficult. Like think about the list or the list that you created of like who lost, and I kind of contributed to it. But LSU loses to Alabama in overtime. That's partly because LSU is playing in the SEC where they're just getting knocked around a bunch, and Kentucky beats Tennessee. So there's so much parity in the bigger leagues that I almost feel like UConn fans aren't ready for that. If I'm being honest, because they've been so spoiled with the effort and the pristine records that can they handle? Can you think UConn fans can handle going to the Big 12? Or I don't think they're going to play in the SEC, but that style of league where any given night is probably like a 5-6 point game.
I think it's important that fans do begin to accept that reality because that's where we're at. UConn isn't that sort of like dominant force that can win every single game against every single team anymore. And I think that's a positive thing. We've talked about that on the show before. I think more elite talent is spread across more schools. And I think ultimately, as we move forward in the new era of college sports, what's going to matter most to people is visibility, is the ability to make money through name, image, likeness, through revenue sharing. So the best players are going to go to the schools where they can make the most money, frankly. And if UConn stays in its current space, that's not going to be UConn. So we have to kind of think about it in that perspective. These are young athletes who have a short period of time in some cases to make a whole lot of money. And they're going to go where they can do that if they have the top talent. So I think, like you said, post Geno, post the sort of like UConn is the top dog standard bearer, there's going to be a whole new landscape that involves different factors than just who can coach you the best, which team is kind of the top in the country. It's going to be, where can I have the best opportunity for exposure? Where can I make the most money? Like it or hate it, that's where we're at with college sports. It's kind of semi-pro at this point.
Absolutely. Well, when we come back, we're going to talk about Diana Taurasi and the legacy of one of the greatest basketball players, if not the best basketball player in the history of the sport. We're going to talk about that coming up after the break. March basketball is here, and there's no better way to get in the action than with Prize Picks, the best place for daily fantasy sports. With Prize Picks, you pick more or less on at least 2 player projections, and if you're right, you can win 1,000 times your cash. It's fast, easy, and keeps you in every game and keeps every game exciting. This week, I'm looking at some NBA players. You can honestly go through a bunch of them. Like I think I did LeBron James more than 25 points last night that hit. And you can do 2 players in the same team. I think Luka Doncic, I had something like he had to be over 24 points. And then there's added rebounds. It's super easy to use. Check it out. I love that you can make picks for both plus and minus for multiple different teams. There's fast payouts, and they have this thing on Tuesdays called Taco Tuesday. Price it's where you get discounted player projections, and there's even more value. So check that out. Download the app today and use the code LOCKEDONCollege to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONCollege for $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, run your game. And we're back on Locked On UConn with our Friday co-host, T. Baker, who's a contributor to Hoops Capital of the World, and the Next, and a Big East beat reporter, walking through what we talked about earlier. Had a great conversation around the Big East and how, even though it's the UConn Invitational, there's a lot of really good competitive and well-coached teams in the Big East. Very good point by T, as well as kind of the national landscape. We kind of talked about how we both feel the 1 seeds were appropriated fine with where they were seated, but UConn as the second 2 seed is a little bit odd considering South Carolina, the South Carolina UConn head-to-head, and all of the different losses in that top 16, NC State, and the loss from Notre Dame 2 times in a row. We didn't talk about Texas almost losing to Mississippi State, but there's just so much parity in this don't take these top 16 as the finality. I just was a little, if I'm honest, pissed off that UConn was behind South Carolina. But hey, it is what it is, right? And let's get into the woman of the hour, Diana Taurasi, right? She retired. I was quoted on the Locked On Podcast Network's main live national sports show talking about how, when you think about her, it echoes memories of it sounds like I'm like doing an after school special, like a simpler time, but it really was like there was like a moment, and I talked to Bella about this because she's just wasn't even born.
Yeah.
Like when Diana Taurasi was dominating college basketball and then eventually pro ball, which is the competitiveness, the hunger to be great. It doesn't take anything away from some of the athletes like you talked about with NIL and things of that nature, but the only reason why you have opportunities in this sport is because of people like Diana Taurasi. So there's no Paige Beckers without Diana Taurasi. There just isn't. And you could go down the line. I'm losing my train of thought, but like I mentioned Candace Parker, I mentioned Cheryl Swoops. Like there's so many women that came before that have paved the way for people like Paige, like Caitlin Clark, like an Angel Reese. So like Brianna Stewart and Nafisa Collier. So I just think her legacy is about that established a foundation of how amazing not only women's sports is, but just her greatness in basketball was so hard to quantify. I don't know any other way to say it other than she was amazing.
Yeah, that about says it. I think she's definitely going to be missed. For me, she was this really important link to the past of the sport, because you think about someone like Diana Taurasi. She played on the 2004 Olympic team with players like Dawn Staley, like Lisa Leslie, like Cheryl Swoops, like Tina Thompson. She evolved throughout all of the years to play, with players like Candace Parker, Skylar Diggins-Smith, now into the days of like Stewie and Asia Wilson.
Mm-hmm.
So the longevity alone is remarkable, but then the amount of winning that happened during that longevity, I think, is what kind of sets her apart. It's, not just WNBA, not just NCAA titles, but winning overseas in EuroLeague, 6 titles, just dominating that tournament, those tournaments, that league, and really just transforming what it means to be a woman in sports in a lot of ways. I think Diana Taurasi kind of stepped in and created a different type of swagger that women could play with, a different type of aggressiveness. She kind of gets the villain at it in a way that hasn't been sort of owned by a lot of women prior to that. So just a remarkable player, remarkable teammate, and just a remarkable person. I think that's the thing. It's, if you ever had the chance to spend any time just around her, speaking to her in media, like there's just something about her that draws you in, and it has been that way since she was a high schooler at Don Lugo High School. It's just she's a remarkable person and player.
I'm going to give you something that, and this is an old school thing, and this is not a quote from me. This is just, I remember when I was I wouldn't say I was a kid. I was probably in my early 20s when she was dominating at UConn, and I was in California at the time, and my dad is 72 years old, still alive and well, doing great things in New York. And I remember when they, the women were playing, and I would get a phone call from him and be like, man, she plays like a man. Like that's the older generation's way of saying, holy bleep, she's so good. You know what I mean? Like, because you didn't see women athletes like her. It was pockets, and I mentioned some, like, the Cheryl Swoops, Cheryl Miller, like, like these kind of unicorns, so to speak. You know what I mean? And so for the older generation, it's so much more prevalent to have athletes of her caliber now in women's sports that people don't like refer to it as that anymore. But I think he was in his 50s, born in 1950 something. That's like the ultimate props from the older generation to say a female basketball player is playing like a man. Do you understand what I'm saying about that?
I think, yeah. And I think that speaks to the competitiveness. I think there's like a certain like ceiling sometimes on how competitive women can be.
Sure.
Yep.
They're
seen, in ways that aren't so positive. So like, I think that's what she took. Like she had that swagger, and really didn't care at all what you said about it. Didn't care if it bothered you. Didn't care if you called her ladylike. Didn't really care about her image. Didn't really care about being a role model. That's the thing. Like, there is this sort of time period in women's sports where every woman was supposed to be a role model, and then there was kind of in the early 2000s a pushback against that. It's like, we're athletes. You don't ask all these male athletes to tone down their competitiveness or not get technical fouls or not just play with competitiveness and play mean. Like, she's mean to play against. And I think players will say that, like, on the court, she'll rip your heart out and then go out to dinner with you after, because that's the thing. She just wants to be competitive. She wants to play, and she respects the game so much that even to her last game, she honored it.
Yeah, it's so. I remember during the height of the pandemic, there was obviously the Last Dance came out with Michael Jordan, and what you're describing is what everyone says about him, and no one has a problem with it. So with someone like Diana, it should never be any different, and I think that's true. My favorite quote is not the one I sent you, but I'm going to say it anyway. But this is my favorite quote from her is, if you're smart, you go to Harvard. If you're good at basketball, you go to UConn. And then she just kind of like shrugged and was like, yeah, that's like that. It's pretty simple stuff. You know what I mean? Like, so that was, to me, that's her in a nutshell, like her personality, which is just like, it's not that deep. This is, I'm an athlete. I'm a basketball player. And we can talk about stuff like life and things like that off the court. But when we're talking about sports and, other things, this is it's a basic thing.
Yeah, and I think that's, there was a lot of sort of like vitriol, I would call it, when she made the Olympic team and certain other players didn't. But for me, I don't know how you don't pick Diana Taurasi to be on the team. And it's not even like that. It's like one of those honorary picks, right? Like,
right.
That she has a level of leadership and experience that just stabilizes everyone. And I got to see them at a practice in Cleveland last year at the Final Four before the Olympics. And she's the first player, like leading the warmups, showing them how it's done in the gym. Like, she's modeled for now generations of players how to be an elite athlete, what it means to put on a USA basketball jersey. And she didn't play in that last game against France, but I was watching her on the bench. She was joking around with teammates. She was dapping up Sabrina Ionescu after big shots. Like, that's the type of stuff that keeps people cool, calm, and collected on the court. And I think that's what makes her so unique. Gino calls her the best winner of all time. I think she might be one of the best teammates of all time. But I think from an outside looking in, people kind of just think she's, a bit of a jerk, just like kind of not someone who you'd want to spend time with. But her teammates say differently. All her coaches say differently.
Listen, after reading the Time magazine quote where she said they're in a room in 2016 with all basketball players, men and women, and she just singled out Draymond Green and said, "Hey, Draymond, how does it feel to be the only person in this room who's never been double teamed?" Honestly, like, how can you not like her? Like, that's the funniest thing I've ever heard anyone say to another athlete. Other that is slightly mean, but it's also just good ribbing and roasting of someone, because I guarantee you everyone was rip roaring laughing at that. And also, it's true. It's the truth. No one's double teaming Draymond Green in the NBA.
No way. And I think that's the thing. She has ability to disarm people. I don't know if you saw her interview on The View the day she announced her retirement, but Whoopi Goldberg mispronounced her name. So she came out and called her Whippy and just like said her name wrong back to her. Like, she's just so quick. She's so confident. And she's just made me laugh so much over the past 20 years. It's just been an absolute pleasure to watch her play. I had the chance to go see her last game in Phoenix, and the love that city has for her. She has her family there. Like, it's going to be very different without her there. And I just can't wait to see what she does next. I think she's going to get into media, more Bird Taurasi show.
Love to see it.
Kind of the nightmare of all ESPN execs who have to worry about what's said on live TV, but I'm here for it.
I'm here for her coming on this show. What do you think? She's been on Locked On Women's Basketball, so we're gonna have to see if we can get her on. She's a UConn great. We had Rosati on. We're trying to get Kara Walters, Rebecca Lobo, all you guys. Let's just get on. But I would love to have Diana on, because that would just be a fun interview. Like, I think she would be funny and kind of just probably make fun of me every once in a while. I'm here for it. Roast me. It'd be great. To close the show, Gino, said that she transcends the sport and she's become synonymous with the sport, which is that to me spells greatest of all time. I'm going to ask you, is she the greatest of all time?
I think Gino made an important point. The greatest winner of all time. I think that when we talk about players and head-to-heads and things like that, like, there's just so much era-specific stuff, and I know that's kind of like the lame answer to say, but like
No, it's fine.
at the end of the day, like she is the greatest winner of all time. No player has won as much as she has, and to me, that situation, that statement can't be argued. 6 Olympic gold medals, more of any man or woman. 6 EuroLeague titles, tied for the most. 3 WNBA titles, 3 in college. Like it just keeps on going, and I don't know how you can make an argument that someone has had a better career than that. I really don't.
I don't think you can. And I also think it's a shame that the only travesty of her time is really kind of the inability for the WNBA to kind of create the infrastructure and the ability to kind of have what you have now, right? To have a situation where you can have 2.1 million people watching a Tuesday night game or whatever it is going forward. Is that she had to go to Russia and other places to play, and it kind of robbed the American people of her greatness for many years, right? And so that to me is the only thing that sucks. It's not her fault. It's like it just shows how great she actually is, that she actually is such like a world trendsetter, a trendsetter around the world, that she had to do that to kind of further her basketball career. So that's the only sad thing I would say.
Yeah, I mean, also she could have way more money in the bank had it been a different situation. I think also like her WNBA salary never paid her what she was worth, not even close. But she wasn't also a player who was really big into like being the face of the league. I think
Right.
there's a discussion lately in the NBA about like Anthony, what's his name from Minnesota? You can tell I don't watch.
Anthony Edwards.
I can tell I don't watch a lot of men's basketball. There was this conversation I was listening of like he doesn't want to be the face of the league because that comes with a certain level of responsibility and almost like respectability politics that Diana was never going to achieve. You don't want your face of the league telling the ref you're going to beat him up in the lobby. Like you just don't. It's not like what that sort of title has. And so she's never tried to be that. And I respect that because it's been all about ball the whole time. It's never been about trying to be anything for anyone else at any point.
It is so spot on that you mentioned Anthony Edwards, because I went to bed last night right as he was getting ejected and being like throwing a ball into the stands and tossing his jersey down the tunnel. So yeah, he does not give a rip about anything other than playing basketball, and it's a good comparison. But anyway, that's the show today. Love having T on. Really appreciate him and his perspective. All right, this has been another episode of Locked On UConn. I usually sign off by saying a Gino quote, but I'm going to sign off by saying what Diana says. If you're smart, you go to Harvard. If you're good at basketball, you go to UConn, right? It's a no-brainer. Go Huskies.